doing local model execution. With me as usual, I have my friend Dustin Hobart. Hey Dustin, how's it going?
Good. Good.
Yeah,
We never talked about cursor before. I thought we talked about cursor
in episode 2, we talked about cursor background. But I think it was in episode 3 or 4 when we talked about Claude Code. We were using cursor at the time as a VS Code function for but yeah, obviously that was like a year ago, or late July, 11 months ago, when we did episode 2 on cursor background. At that point, the idea of like not running an agent on your computer was a very different thing. We weren't doing we're still coding in an IDE, still, I think we're just kind of departing from autocomplete. So we're talking about cursor this week. Oh, by the way, for those who are out there, we're Riverside seems to streamline a lot of that. We still use QSO for social media posts, hopefully in the future. Also, we're using blog page for our website. I experimented with cursor. The way I did it was I wanted to keep my development process the same. Like I wanted to take my day-to-day coding activity and I wanted to just use cursor with it. So it was the most easiest way for me to see the difference. And so we talked about, we never did an episode on Crow. Maybe we should.
We should probably do that.
So we have a tool that we wrote that we open source called Crow. It's at radius method /Crow in GitHub. And so basically it allows you, it's a harness for using Claude Code. It allows you to pick up tickets and code them, pass off code review. You could do things like auto merge, auto code review refinement. And so we added support for codecs so that you could hot swap the coding agents. And I just added, I did a bunch of work, you could check out the commit history. I did a bunch of work to basically add support for cursor. And so what I did is I used Claude as my kind of orchestration with cursor doing the coding, and I'll set up for code reviews. So I was able to kind of experiment with them side by side, kind of, sort of. So the first thing that was different, obviously, it looks a lot like Claude Code. It looks a lot like Codex. It looks a lot like Open Code. Although Open Code is a completely different animal because it doesn't have a preferred, it has an API layer, a server that you run. But the first thing that I noticed was that, and I guess you knew this already, that Cursor has its own model now called Composer. And essentially what Composer is, this is really interesting drama, especially with the SpaceX IPO next week, which is, I think they're raising 75 billion, although it might go higher. It'll be the largest IPO in history. And you talked about it a few episodes back. I think it was episode 29 or 30 about the acquisition for 60 billion. It's just interesting because all they did was they took Kimi, which is a open weights model under the MIT license for a company called, I forget the name of the company actually. It's a former engineer from Google. It's a Chinese originated model, and essentially Cursor's like retraining it to do coding based tasks, tool calling. But the issue that they ran into was that they don't have the infrastructure to actually do the retraining. And so essentially by the SpaceX acquisition, uh, Grok, or sorry, OpenAI, or sorry, XAI or SpaceX, what was XAI, Grok, the Grok, I guess they GA'd their coding tool yesterday, which I think before you couldn't use it, now you can. Um, their model is not as good as Anthropic and OpenAI codex. I'm trying to figure out like why would Grok or SpaceX acquire a company that essentially is just retraining an open weights model? Like, what is the benefit of doing that? So basically, like you can choose which model you want to use in Cursor. You can use you can use Codex, ChatGPT models. You can use Anthropic models. You can use Gemini, and you can use Composer and Grok also. Interestingly enough, I heard, and I haven't seen it because I haven't used it, is that the Grok coding tool actually lets you select Composer now. So you can already see the synergies. But yeah, I was just curious. I'm trying to figure out, like, I know that they can use Colossus to essentially get the compute for free. Um, the only thing I can think of is like they can basically cut into the OpenAI and Anthropic margins, because people buy Cursor and then use the subsidized stuff from Codex, and basically they're subsidizing the model usage. You pay $20 or $200 a month, and you get subsidized usage of whatever model you're choosing or whatever. I'm using Composer just because I wanted to see how it performs, and ultimately, I think that's what the future of Cursor looks like. But like before we get into like what Cursor can do, because that's really not that interesting, the short answer is like not that great. Claude Code is better. It has some features, but like you could just see that everybody's just copying everybody now. Like the coding agents are like, for lack of a better word, like there wasn't anything that I really couldn't do. You can resume sessions, you can do goal loops, you can actually use Claude Code commands automatically. They just drop in, and Cursor's smart enough to see the .claude directory. So I was able to use all the existing commands and skills inside of Cursor without having to do anything. It could read all the Claude MD files. It's just not as sophisticated as a model at the end of the day. The tool itself is fine. I would use it. I did use it for coding for a day. I didn't see any discernible difference. Like it seemed to do a pretty good job. I don't know if I was giving it really complicated stuff to work on.
Yeah, I had heard a lot about Composer 2.5. It had scored well on some benchmarks. I think the benchmarks have asterisks next to them because I don't think that Composer has an API, so there's no real way for others to evaluate it against benchmarks. You have to use it through Cursor, and therefore it's really only evaluated on benchmarks that Cursor themselves have put it through. They say it scores pretty high, but yeah, I didn't expect it to be an Opus or the latest Codex GPT model killer. But I heard that it's pretty solid for the fact that it came out of Cursor, which isn't a frontier AI lab. It shows that if you have the data, right? And so to give you an idea of like, why would SpaceX buy Cursor? It's like, if you think of Cursor as just a UI, for developing, then you're not thinking of what their most valuable asset is, which if it was just UI, I think that SpaceX and XAI would have just built their own,
Right.
harness. But what it really is the data, right? So Cursor has years and years and years well, maybe that's too many years, but
2 years,
it,
maybe 2
it
years.
has it has from the beginning, because it was one of the first coding harnesses. It has all of that data, so it probably has close to the most amount of data, if not the most, um, of back and forths between coding agents and users looking to code. So, and not only that, but all the other providers probably only have their own data of back and forth with their own model, right? But Cursor has back and forths between all the different models. So it has codecs back and forths, thinking and writing files and tool calls and everything that's going on in your coding agent. It has Anthropic, it has Grok, it has a whole bunch of data, right? So that data is important, because what you can do is you can take a model like you mentioned, Kimi, and then you can RL train on the back and forth from all those different models and basically make Kimi. And if you look at the data of like their benchmarks versus base Kimi, like they legitimately did that. They made it way
Yep.
better at coding than it was
Right.
on its
Yep.
own.
Yep. Exactly.
Um, and so that proves that if you have the data and then an open source model, you can approach what the frontier models are through RL training alone. Now they needed data centers, they needed the GPUs in order to do that, which is why
Yeah.
they signed that deal um, with SpaceX. SpaceX needs the data, and Cursor needs the data centers.
But not only that, like there is a like immediate, I don't know how big the effect is, but essentially like Cursor was renting data centers to train the models because they don't have
Mm-hmm.
data centers. So they were basically renting compute from Anthropic and OpenAI to train their models because they're reselling them. So it was
Yeah.
in their best interest to like get people to use Cursor, and they probably were like, cool, we're getting money from the subsidized model usage, we're getting money from the renting. And then here you have SpaceX that comes in that can now immediately kind of stick it to Anthropic and OpenAI by cutting
Mm-hmm.
into their margins, and probably a large consumer of. I was just surprised that they took a Chinese model and trained on top of it. But I guess nobody cares anymore, or maybe it doesn't matter, or who knows. But yeah,
I mean,
I
I guess theoretically was using a distilled version of Kimi and not straight from. I'm not sure what the
yeah
story is, but it's an interesting thing to look into to see exactly how much distillation was happening in order to perhaps protect from whatever might be in the Kimi model that is nefarious.
yeah
Um, but yeah, I mean, I also wonder whether the Anthropic deal with SpaceX to use data centers was unlocked by this, because I know that Anthropic and XAI have been kind of at arm's length from each other. I think Anthropic cut off the XAI team from Claude at some point in the past, so they at least have somewhat of a tense relationship. And there was a lot of speculation that Anthropic didn't want to work together with Grok or with XAI because they were worried about them getting data from Anthropic and using it to catch up in coding.
yeah
Um, but then suddenly they're working with XAI on data centers, and it happened right on the tail end of XAI signing a deal with Cursor for the data. So it's almost like Anthropic said, "Well, they already got the data, so we might as well get the data centers," you
yeah
know. Um, and maybe that's what unlocked the deal. It's speculation on my part, though.
yeah yeah. So I mean, basically, like SpaceX is behind. They need to catch up. Obviously, I mean, the IPO is. I think there's the capital is to build data centers in space,
Mm-hmm.
which helps reduce cost for training and stuff like that. Um, the Colossus stuff is probably not doing as much as it could be doing. It's just maybe sitting there. A lot of the compute is not being used because their coding efforts are way behind, or probably not moving as quickly. And so then Cursor becomes like, there's like a third player in the space, right? Because it's like really Codex and Claude Code that are the main ones, and then there's a third kind of player in the space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Microsoft looked at Cursor also in past. Um, but Microsoft also doesn't. I don't think they have their own models. Um, so yeah, so it's just interesting, because like Cursor, like a year ago, was a VS Code fork. Now it's a subsidiary of a company that's going to be part of the most valuable IPO and is a rocket funded uh, company essentially. Who would
Yeah.
have thought like a year ago that it would be what it is? Like kind of crazy the world that we live in, that you could start out as like a VS Code fork and be like this like in a year.
Aren't they potentially a subsidiary? Because I think there's still a $10 billion out
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
XAI
for sure.
has, where they could be like, okay, we got the data, we don't like the rest. Here's $10 billion.
Yeah. I mean, still $10
Have
billion
fun.
dollars is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, nothing to sneeze at, unless I guess
So,
you're Elon Musk, in which case you might
but I'm
sneeze.
just saying, like, from the Cursor angle, like, I guess my storyline was like, you're a VS, you decided one day I'm going to fork VS Code and I'm
Yeah.
going to create like a better coding agent. And then, like, a year later, 18 months later, you're being like given $10 billion. Like, that's pretty amazing. Like, that's the landscape of like the types of bets people are making. Like, is it worth $10 billion? Who knows? The data is valuable, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just crazy. Like the world that we live in right now, like with as it
It's the
relates to
power of being first,
yeah,
like they got in there quick. They were smart enough to realize that this thing was going to be a market. I don't know if they were that brilliant of knowing how big it was going to be, but they certainly knew it was a market. They got into it. It ended up turning out to be the biggest market in all of AI in
yeah,
the beginning, and they rode that into an amazing business. Um, Now it started to languish a little bit because now the big players are in there, the big money, the big data centers, and they're kind of like Anthropic a little bit, where they don't have the data centers, they don't have as much of the money, but they're even smaller than Anthropic. They have even less data centers, even less money. So I think it's a great deal for them to, and it's kind of like the underdog story. They're the ones that aren't the frontier. Out of all the other players, they aren't the frontier, but they're still biting at the ankles and keeping in the realm.
yeah. So this is what Cursor kind of shipped. Um, they have cloud handoff, which is like remote. You
Mm-hmm.
basically can hand off to a web based console, which you can ostensibly do with Claude.
Mm-hmm.
You have mode rotation. So same way in Claude Code, you have plan mode, you have ask mode, you have agent mode. One thing I did find out is their auto mode. Once you set their auto mode, you never have to change it again. So you can like literally like put it in like a mode where it will never ask you ever again if you want it auto. Like after you do it 3 times, it'll just say, "Do you want me to set it so it's always auto mode?"
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that was interesting.
I
Could
think Claude has that, but you have to go into your like config and change it. I don't know if there's an easy
yeah,
way to do it.
yeah.
Um, I wish
They
there was a plan mode though. I hate that plan asks me questions.
Yeah, so plan ask clarifying questions / ask is read only exploration. Um, you also have the background agents are now called cloud agents, so you can run up to 8 agents in parallel on one prompt via Git trees.
Mm.
Um, you could do a multitask, which basically I think Claude is agent or workflow, where basically it breaks a request into chunks and then it gets fanned out into sub agents. But Claude seems to kind of do that automatically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a loop skill, so it's basically they have the Ralph Wiggum loop or the goal skill, which we should talk about at some point. Basically, you run a prompt repeatedly or on a schedule until a condition is met.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, you can do automations. There's Jira integration. They have auto review run mode, decide whether shell, MCP, or fetch calls run. And then they have an SDK, so they have a cursor SDK. But yeah, I mean, it seems to be like, I mean, all of these seem, it's hard to see the difference between them other than the models. That really seems to be the difference. And yeah,
Mhm.
so that was cursor.
I mean, if I rewind all the way back to when, we probably did episode 3 or 4, I feel like everything is consolidated because back then it was like Claude Code was just far better than everything else and nothing was like even close. It was like I would talk to people and they would say they're using this or that. And I would say, why aren't you using Claude Code? You know, nowadays when people say they're using Codex, I don't say, why aren't you using Claude Code? Because I know why they're using Codex because it's, in the same ballpark as Claude Code. And likewise with Cursor, I don't say anything to people who are using Cursor because I assume that they're in the ballpark too.
Yeah.
Um, I think there is maybe, at some point you're so good at coding that every additional improvement isn't earth shattering. It's just uh, incremental improvement. So I think that's what's happening is it's just plateauing to the sense where I would expect a year from now all the coding tools are almost interchangeable.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess we'll find out.
The models aren't that much different. Like I said, like as I was going throughout my day, like a lot of my coding is just creating tickets. Like it's not actually coding. I'm not
Mhm.
steering anything like with Crow. And I can tell you that like I didn't really see any difference. Like I didn't like my day didn't like it seemed indeterminate and indiscriminate. Like, okay, so I was coding and your Crow was doing code review. So you reviewed everything that Cursor did with Claude. And I didn't find like, wow, this is really bad. Like there's more code review cycles than normal. It was just a regular old day. I really didn't notice a massive difference. Again, like was I doing something complicated that required a more advanced model? What I'm starting to think is that like it's just good enough. Like maybe you don't really need Opus to do what you're doing in every use case, and maybe
And once you
matters.
get to the point that you're running like jobs and nets over your data, like we were talking about with Crow, you can set up jobs and things like that. So I have jobs that once a day go check logs in production and find errors and other problems in the logs, and then make tickets and assign them to me. And then my Crow
Yeah,
picks up those tickets and diagnoses them and fixes them.
yeah,
And then I have jobs that wake up and look for gaps in the ADRs versus our project and look
yeah,
for, multi-tenant bugs and, RLS or whatever else, whatever
yeah,
project we happen to be working on. I think that like the difference between a great model and a bad model at the end of the day just may end up being another cycle or two that you go through or more, in other words, like maybe there's more fish in the ocean to find, but your net eventually picks them all up. So what's the
yeah,
difference?
yeah, yeah. That was my experience. Like I would use Cursor, I would use Codex, like I would use them for different things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, even maybe certain tasks like where you're trying to like I even thought about like, hey, like I wonder if I had enough compute, and maybe this is a good segue into the news or noise. If I had enough compute, I would just run like a coding model if there is one, like in Hugging Face, like a free one, and see if there was a difference. Like you run it in OpenLlama and wire up Crow to use it for code review and or coding tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like you need the money to do it, and it might be more expensive than paying $20 a month. But yeah, so it's just interesting because I just got a feeling like, wow, these things are more alike than they are different. And the models too. Like again, people are like you said, people are saying these amazing things about Mythos, and I'm sure it's really good at doing certain things,
Mm-hmm.
but I suspect that there's the subsidization and the convergence of the models like are getting closer and closer to each other in terms of like all the data that they're getting is the same data. Like after you get like 100 people coding in a programming language, you pretty much understand like how much more reinforcement learning training is really going to separate you from the pack.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my readout on Cursor, and I'm
And,
curious to hear about um, you know the Nvidia thing because I think that that sounds interesting.
and considering how all the different providers are, essentially RLing off of each other, right? Just helping, distill a little bit from each other. They're also converging because like when one gets a little bit ahead, all the other ones just train on that aspect that they
Or
want
they
to do
just
better.
hire the people that help them get there and pay them a higher
Yeah.
salary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
just
it's
poach
it's
people.
it seems to be consolidating for a number of different reasons, and
Yeah,
that's good for the developer, right? Because one thing that wouldn't be good for the developer is if Claude Code just increased their lead more and more and more and more until eventually you couldn't use anything but Claude Code. And then I can tell you with 100% certainty that the model prices would not come down. They'd probably go up, right? And it would become more and more of like, well, you've got to be, you've got to have a budget in order to do this stuff. But I think that as the coding tools consolidate, it's going to become cheaper and cheaper as they compete with each other. Um, at least that's how it typically happens.
yeah.
So let's segue into news or noise. The one news topic I wanted to talk about was Nvidia's RTX Spark. So there's two components of this. One is that they released, Jensen formally announced RTS Spark as Nvidia's new super chip for compact desktop PCs and laptops, building on the foundation of their earlier GB10 super chip. Um, the headline is that it's got up to 6,144 core Blackwell GPU, up to 20 ARM cores, up to 128 gigabytes of unified memory, which is, I think, the big piece of it. Um, and then the side piece of this is that Microsoft is partnering on this, and they have a bunch of laptops that are coming out that are going to be powered by RTX Spark out of Nvidia, and it's really kind of a play at what Apple is doing. Apple has really kind of forged the way of having the MacBook Pro with the M chips and the Apple Silicon, kind of vertically integrating within the hardware space to come out with a laptop that's able to be coherent and have enough memory and do all the components you have to put together in order to have a good AI chip and the power to do AI work on a laptop. So this is really a play at that, it looks like. And it, I mean, they're saying that you can run like 128 billion parameter models on this RTX Spark at a million token context. Where the 128 gigabyte of memory unified comes into play. So yeah, it's pretty impressive. I mean, those laptops are going to be pretty powerful. There's some questions. I mean, if you dig into the rabbit hole of YouTube, before release, there's people out there saying, well, how are they going to, given the amount of power draw on, what people can see today, like with those components outside of RTX Spark, how are they going to get a laptop that has good battery power based on that? They're going to have to throttle it in some way. So we'll have to see just how powerful it is when it's released. But, based on the way they're hyping it up and saying you're going to be impressed by it, uh, you know, people
What's
are
with
pretty
the
interested to see how it
what's
goes.
with the laptop form factor?
It's a good question. Like, why wasn't this a desktop release? I don't know, but the chip is incredibly small, so it fits in a laptop. I think that's
Wait,
maybe
like
a
why not
piece of
like a
it.
Mac Mini type form factor? Like why a screen and a
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the idea is that you could already build this type of stuff in
Mhm.
um, a desktop by putting the various components together. I mean, that's what they're doing in the data centers in many cases. Uh, and I think this is the first kind of idea of like, no, 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 this isn't something that you're taking what's in a data center and putting it underneath your desk. This is
Yeah.
like in the device. This is the future. You're going to take it with you. You're going to be offline
Is it for
and
like
be running this.
gaming? Maybe.
Gaming as well. It's a gaming
Yeah.
laptop that apparently can do top line gaming. I know that's another piece. I mean, that's actually probably like half the news. A lot of the people are like, gaming is back. Oh, this is the part that's actually pretty cool. Is it bakes all of the local, like it's embedded with the OS in such a way where like the OS can leverage the AI. So that means that like you're going to have games that come out in the future that require this chip because they're going to be running on device AI. So all those things where you're wondering like, when am I going to get games where I'm talking to characters that evolve and have soul and are talking back to me like ChatGPT? The reason why you don't have that is because A, the devices are not powerful to do that type of stuff on board, and B, if they were to go out and do API calls, you'd be end up spending $100 a month on your game just to play it. So the reality is that this is what unlocks that.
Yeah.
If you want to be playing, the new GPT or GPT,
GTA 6.
GTA, Grand Theft Auto, and be running around and having real conversations with the characters and getting unique pathways through the game that others don't encounter because it's all LLM being generating, then you're going to need something like this on the device in order to make it affordable.
Yeah.
Um, and then also from our perspective, like, I love Opus and GPT and Grok and all that kind of stuff. And I use it every single day for my job. And, I get amazing productivity from it. But at some point, I'm going to want all that productivity to be on my device so that I don't have to have all this data flowing out to the providers for God knows what they're doing with it.
Right.
So, right now it's an acceptable loss because you don't have another choice. But at some point in the future, I'd like the idea of privacy. I'd like the idea of there's not a provider out there that knows more about me than maybe I do,
Right.
So I think that this is the beginning of local AI at frontier levels almost. So pretty excited about that. Obviously it's not out there. You can't go out there and see reviews of people using it yet. So we'll have to see how much it matches up with the hype. But it looks pretty solid based on the specs. It looks pretty impressive.
Do you know if there's a price point?
Well, I know just the RTX Spark, sort of little mini box that they're selling, that Nvidia is selling is like, I think it started at 2,000 something and now it's all the way up to 4,000 or 5,000 just based on the GPU prices fluctuating and going up. So if it takes $5,000 just to buy the RTS Spark, I can't imagine that putting a monitor on it, a keyboard and everything like that is going to make it cheaper. So it's probably going to be over $5,000 for the laptop at least.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if they'll get into the cell phone market or like mobile device market, like being able to run these types of models. Like, it'll be interesting to see next week is a Monday is Apple Developer Conference to see what changes are happening in their Apple Intelligence platform, which is really not anything. I mean, Siri is just not, it's terrible. We can't do anything with it in terms of using AI at all. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, I think um, there's a lot of money being left on the table in terms of AI usage. I mean, I have stuff I can run on my phone. The the processor power inside the mobile devices, particularly I have an M4 or M5 iPad Pro, and you can do some pretty amazing things with offline models directly on the iPad.
Mm. I mean, I like Apple. I have a lot of Apple devices, but I don't use anything I have everything turned off related to AI. Um, Not because I'm trying to be like, privacy oriented or a Luddite or anything like that. It's because they suck. They're just,
Yeah,
they're worse than having them turned off.
yeah,
Like anytime I get a notification and it tries to like summarize the thread, first of all, you've got like what, a line and a half in the notification to summarize something. So it's the design of it from the beginning was never going to work. It's
yeah,
just like worse than anything.
yeah,
Yeah, I can't think of anything that I use from Apple related to AI. In fact, I think Apple would have nothing related to AI if it wasn't for the fact that they have MacBook Pro with M chips and everything like that. It's really their only story at all related to AI is the hardware side,
yeah,
you know, which is pretty impressive. But now they're
yeah,
going to get some major competition from the big boy in the room when it comes to hardware. So,
yeah,
can't if you're Apple, this isn't good news.
yeah. So supposedly next week, they're talking about Siri 2, which is a completely redesigned AI assistant
Mm,
featuring deep personal context, on-screen awareness, cross-app capability. They integrate with Gemini, which we knew about.
mm,
So they got rid of their. Um, they basically have Gemini running in their own private cloud.
mm.
So yeah, for enhanced security, whatever that means. So it'll be interesting to see next week. Obviously, whatever they release won't be available until like September.
So they finally got to the point where they realized their Siri should just
Oh yeah,
wire up to the frontier models, let them do the
yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah. We
Can someone
we
check Bezos's pulse? Like, where the hell when is my Alexa gonna stop telling me dumb stuff all the time? I'm gonna
yeah,
have to throw all those things out and abandon it. But I'm
yeah,
waiting for them to finally do what. If I work for them, I could probably roll it out in a couple of months. Just hook it up to the providers and let people ask questions through Alexa with the providers. Geez, it's a
yeah,
terrible experience. It's sad.
yeah. Um, yeah. What else? What else in news or noise?
Yeah. So we also have just a minor thing. GitHub's Copilot has shifted their billing. Um, they're pausing new signups for Copilot Pro and Pro Plus and announced the move to usage-based billing starting June 1st. So 4 days
No more
ago.
subsidized usage.
No more subsidized usage. Their market share has dropped from 67 to 51%. Um, while Cursor has, to give you an example, Cursor has reached 2 billion ARR, and Claude Code has grown sixfold during that period of time. So Copilot has dropped what 16 or 16%, while all the others have done multiples of everything. So that's pretty horrible, and
Yeah,
that's what my experience too. I mean, if I hear someone's using Copilot, I still say, why aren't you using Claude Code? Why aren't
yeah,
you using Claude Code or Codex or anything? Why don't you just write it by hand at this point?
yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if soon they just decide to abandon it altogether.
Yeah, I put Microsoft in the same category as Meta, where they seem to be like, you know, on the bench trying to figure out how to get into the game. And,
Yeah,
you know, every single time they get an opportunity to get on the field, they trip and fall and someone else takes their spot. Um, you've got the AI coding arms race, we kind of alluded this to it a little bit. You have Google with anti-gravity. They just came out with Gemini 3.5 Flash, which is, from what I can tell, not too great. It's expensive, uses a lot of tokens, and underperforms other models at the same price range. Cursor pushed out Composer 2.5, which we talked about earlier. Windsurf, which I haven't even heard about that in a long time. Added Devin, which is another thing I haven't heard about in a while. They added Devin support. Cairo, which is from Amazon, another player in the distance, introduced a new credit model. On the model side, Anthropic shipped Opus 4.8, which, had, I can't even tell the difference, honestly, between 4.7 and 4.8. It seems like it's maybe a modest change, if at all.
Yeah.
And then there's XAI. XAI has come out with, they're calling it Grok Build, I think.
Yep.
Which is
Yep.
their CLI coding agent, or TUI, I guess I should call it. So that's something that's notable.
Yeah, and I did mention that they did add Composer as a choice.
Yeah,
for a model in there.
It's going to be interesting if they end up buying Cursor. What happens to Composer and Grok? Do they combine? Does Grok just end up all training off of Composer?
Yeah.
What's the future of that?
Yep. Yep. Or both.
Yeah.
Just have both. Yeah.
So
is the Grok model, whatever it is, Grok Code or whatever it is, what is it trained on? Is it trained on tweets?
Yeah.
So,
which is good timely information, but is not like the most, it's not like the most sophisticated of writing.
Right.
So the combined of the two would probably make it much better at coding, especially with Composer's data.
And I'm sure you want to be coding while you're driving in your Tesla.
Yeah. Even better. I want my Tesla to be coding.
Which, by the way, there's now a Apple CarPlay app for Grok, which is like pretty cool that I could actually talk to Grok while I'm driving.
Oh, nice. That's pretty cool.
My non-Tesla.
Yeah.
It uses like the Grok app on my phone, obviously. So
I can say, "Hey Grok" in my car, and it just wakes up and starts talking.
Nice. Yeah.
And however, I let my Grok subscription, I had Grok Heavy with the most expensive Grok subscription, and I let it lapse because I hadn't really been using Grok a lot lately. And I noticed that my car only lets me do a certain number of requests to Grok before it tells me I'm rate limited. So I'm like, oh man, I guess I got to upgrade my subscription a little bit if I want to use that more often. But yeah, overall, I think that Grok is kind of like plateaued a little bit. I think that they need to have another step up to get to where the other players are. I don't use it as often as I used to in the past, when there was a period of time in the past where it was actually probably better at answering questions and getting you good depth and understanding the sort of physics of the problem and everything like that, the axioms and the variables. But now it may still be better at that, but it's now far behind all the other frontier models in terms of other things. So it's hard to find time for it. Yeah. So a few things, like Claude came out with this feature called workflows. And funny enough, the way to start using it is you just mention the word workflow in your prompt, which is really annoying. because you might have an app that has, I mean, workflow is probably one of the most common words used in engineering. In coding, you're going to have tons of variables or objects or things like that that have workflow in it in some way or another. So now, feel bad for anyone out there with a class called workflows, because anytime you mention that class, it's going to kick off this new workflow feature in Claude Code, which, by the way, they turned it off, so you can opt out of it now, and then you can save yourself from that problem. But in the beginning, when it first rolled out, it would start doing workflows, this new workflow concept, which, by the way, for the life of me, I can't figure out what the difference is. I mean, I can when I read it, but like in the beginning, I was like, what's the difference between workflows and goals, right? Like, workflows is this idea that it kicks off a whole bunch of sub agents around some sort of task, and then it completes when they all find consensus. And then goals is that it kicks off a thread that's working on a problem until it checks off all the items on some sort of list that you've given it. So you have to, goals is kind of like a Ralph Wiggum loop in the sense that you have to provide it upfront with its ability to figure out almost deterministically whether it's done. And then workflows is almost like, it reminds me a little bit of the idea of like do a code review and a fix in a loop and wonder if it ever gets to the point where it says there's no more items, because it needs all the models to converge on a consensus. So that could run for a long time as they both second guess each other over and over and over in a loop. So, it's a good question about when do models approach consensus? Do they ever get into a somewhat infinite loop of non-consensus? I think anecdotally, I saw someone on the web said they kicked off workflows on a really tough problem, and it ate through 60 or 70% of their 5-hour limit. So you can do some absolutely massive token usages with workflows, which is why it was kind of annoying that you could inadvertently kick it off by mentioning the word workflows.
Yeah, I think the difference between workflow is that workflows can execute multiple agents work in parallel.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have tasks that can go independent of each other, it will allow you to get to a goal in faster. A goal is a single agent where you need sequential operations.
Mm-hmm.
So now theoretically you could probably combine them together.
I mean, the goal could use sub agents like they do automatically, like with Explorer, et cetera. But I guess like workflows is different. It's not, when it says multiple agents, it means multiple like top level agents as opposed to sub agents. Like each of your agents that are going and doing things could then do its own sub agents. I guess.
I don't know that it's distinct to that. I think it's, because when you create like a plan, like the plan might say to execute them in parallel, but it is the building of the plan that figures out to do that. Like, whereas you may want to explicitly tell it, hey, this is a workflow, don't think about it. Like, it's a deterministic way to say run these in parallel versus you building a plan and it deciding to use sub agents is something that Claude Code decides to do for itself. Typically, you don't need to think about that level of detail.
What's funny is I really need to get my head around goals and workflows by starting to use them. All the times that I've used workflows so far has been on accident. And then with goals, I just haven't found the right opportunity to use goals yet. I have thought about the idea of like, when you make a huge multi-phase plan and you break that plan into separate tickets, I want to try taking goal, or maybe workflows is another opportunity, but I think it's more likely goal because there's dependencies. With workflows, I think you mostly want to do things in parallel. So just make it a goal of taking the whole epic and all of the sub tickets and say, I want them all done and in a single branch, meaning merged together at the end. Um, because that's one thing that's sometimes a little bit annoying about breaking a, uh, a task, an epic, into multiple sub pieces, is that, at least according to our tooling and what's available in the harnesses themselves, you certainly in the harnesses themselves don't have something that combines all that back into one release candidate. Um, and then in our tooling, we haven't yet developed something like that. So maybe it's something we do, but maybe the goal thing is an interesting way of getting that same result without having to do any tooling.
Yeah. Um, for example, like say you wanted to do like deep research, like a workflow is a good example of that, where
Mm,
you can spawn off multiple research activities in parallel. Doesn't matter when they're done, they're not dependent upon each other. Whereas like a
yeah.
goal is like you need to do this and then this and then this and then this. Like you wouldn't test in parallel, you would only test after you're done.
Mm,
So yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. Um, what about this? I don't know if you saw today. There's this thing where the U.S. government is going to potentially take a stake in OpenAI.
Oh boy.
Yeah, something called it's like a fund like that the American citizens would
Like the same
own.
thing they did with Intel,
I don't know what that is, but yeah, basically like um,
where
they
they made
met.
Intel give them like a 10% stake or something. I think it was
Yeah,
Intel.
basically OpenAI, Sam Altman, and the White House are in ongoing talks about a possible government stake in AI, the AI company, confirmed Friday by CNBC. The discussions have been going on for a year. Altman suggested the idea in 2025. Something called the Public Wealth Fund.
Mm.
That means OpenAI said the fund could invest in diversified long term assets that will enable citizens to participate in the upside of AI growth. No official investment terms have been decided.
So it's kind of similar to like what the Saudis and other countries in the have with around the oil wealth. Um, the idea of setting up like a sovereign wealth fund, that somehow allows the citizens to maybe get distributions from it or some sort of benefit from it over
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
I mean, it
Um,
seems to have worked out well for some of the Arab nations. So, I think that it's worth investigating. The part that worries me about Anthropic and about OpenAI, and mainly about Anthropic, is that a lot of people, if you're out there and you hear a lot of negative news about AI, like it's going to take your job and it's blackmailing people and you can't control it, it's going to spin out of control and damage somebody, it's going to hack the whole planet. We need to stop people from having access to it until we figure out more. It's not like independent researchers that making those articles. It's literally like Anthropic and one or two other providers that are doing that. Like they are
yeah,
literally putting out their own bad press. And you might wonder why they're doing that. Why would you put out bad press about yourself? And in my opinion, they're exaggerating it because they're trying to make it sound like, remember that Dario from Anthropic, the CEO, who by the way is not a software engineer, right? He's an AI researcher. Um, he was saying that software engineering is going to be done in 6 months, right? We're going to have it all automated. Well, first of all, you don't do it, so how do you know what it entails? But second of all, I don't even think. First of all, he's hiring software engineers while he's saying that. So, like, I'd be interested to see what the interview was like. Am I only going to be here for 6 months? Oh no, we're just telling everyone that. Uh, it's hard to believe that they even believed it when they said it. Um, but it's like this mode they're in, trying to hype up investors so that they can get the next round of funding that they need. Um, but there's also, in my opinion, kind of a nefarious aim behind it, which was that they're trying to get the government to like close the door behind them so that nobody can catch up behind them by saying what we're doing is so dangerous. It needs to be regulated. There need to be like waiting periods before you can release a model until we figure out whether it's safe or not. And all these things that they want to be one of the blessed companies that can do it. And then everybody else has to either work for that company or not do AI. And I think that's a mistake. First of all, I think it's the way that we're going to lose the AI race and not be the leader in that industry. And second of all, I just think it's, bad business. I mean, you're not, if the government has to give you a thumbs up in order for you to release your AI model, I mean, we all know what's going to happen at the end of the day is we're not going to release a lot of AI models. It's going to be very expensive to do so. It's going to be a barrier to entry, no startups, no innovation. It's going to be like a monopoly to some extent, in my opinion.
Yeah. Speaking of which, there was an executive order, two executive orders signed this week, but there was one specifically that was signed today. And it basically mandates that multiple vendors to eliminate single points of failure, addressing the government's over-reliance on Anthropic. No vendor can interfere with military decision-making or impose restriction on lawful use, which resolves the Anthropic impasse. Rapid deployment of frontier models is critical. So something about like a 30-day period. Next generation classified computing facilities enable broader adoption. The June 2nd voluntary testing framework allows innovation while maintaining security vetting. Multiple vendor requirement reduces Anthropic's moat and negotiating the leverage with the Pentagon. Investment in Maven and Palantir integration becomes less strategically critical if the Pentagon can freely substitute OpenAI for other vendors, which part of the kind of success, I guess, in some of their most recent theaters has been Maven being integrated into using Anthropic models. Yeah. I haven't read the whole, I'm just reading a summary of the thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's indicative of part of the issue with how Anthropic has been with the government as well, is like, I don't know. I mean,
so does it force Anthropic to remove their guardrails, their ethical positioning statements from February about using the models that caused the impasse? Does it force their hand because it now becomes a competitive disadvantage to be so restrictive?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's if I were running Anthropic, I would do things a little bit differently. But, then again, I'm not running Anthropic, so I can't, doesn't mean anything at all for me to say that. But hats off to them. I mean, they've done an amazing job. I don't think anyone thought that they would be where they are today. And there's certainly, we talk about mistakes that they're making and things we disagree with, but you just can't deny the fact that they're doing a great job in terms of the efficacy of their product and everything like that. And the models are great. They're trying to do anything they can to maximize their advantages and minimize their disadvantages. And they have a few disadvantages. So, they're trying to find the pathway that allows that to win.
Yeah. The executive orders also, like the one from June 2nd, has like language in it that seems to be driven by some of the claims of Mythos. Like one of the things in here is like the order directs the Attorney General to prioritize enforcement against individuals who use AI to illegally damage or access computer systems, steal data, or facilitate any other criminal activity. So it seems like a lot of this, and I know that the NSA and Project Glasswing, which is the kind of those people who are kind of allowed to use Mythos ahead of the general release.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if this is around maybe the NSA saw stuff and was like, oh shit, like this could actually cause really bad damage and we need to kind of get ahead of this. So a lot of that reads like not only the models that are being built now, but in the future that the government, the US government, has the ability to preview these models before the general public does so that they can understand how it may affect national security
Yeah. Which, first of all, if I were to think,
without burdening innovators at the same time.
first of all, if I were to think of all the people in the world that I want to evaluate the model to tell me how dangerous it is, the government, knowing what I know about, you know, the the efficiency of the government, I mean, do you really think that they're going to be able to look at a model and say this is safe or this is not safe? You know, and then how long is that going to take? You know, in my experience, I would think that they're not going to be very well equipped to do that because you kind of have to be an AI researcher in the first place to evaluate how dangerous a model is, or at least be in the realm. And then, second of all, in government, the incentive is to say it's not safe because if you say it's safe and then it becomes not safe, it's your butt, you know. So,
Yeah.
it's look at how zoning, look at how getting approved for a data center and getting approved for like a power plant is, some people wait 10 years and then get rejected, you know?
Yeah.
So like, is it going to be another one of those situations where now it takes you 10 years to get your model out, because some government bureaucrat is trying to figure out whether it's dangerous or not. And, they're not even the right person to be able to figure that out.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that worries me. And not only that, but I don't believe something I can't see, right? Like I don't believe in hype. Like in Austin, everyone talks about Franklin's barbecue, and I'll probably get hate for this because everyone will say it's amazing, but everyone's like Franklin's barbecue is the best barbecue place. And then I ask people, have you been to Franklin's barbecue? And they're like, no, I haven't, but that's what I heard, right? And you got to line up at like 6 a.m. and you got to wait there on 3-hour line to get Franklin's barbecue. By noon, they close because they run out of barbecue every day. And it's like, you can't find anybody who's had it, but everyone knows it's the best.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure they have great barbecue and, it's probably great. But there is something to say about like making people wait on lines, making it something scarce, hyping it up in the background. People tend to, it's the same reason why clubs keep a line out the door because they want everyone who drives on the street to be like, wow, that club is popular,
Did you ever see what was it, the night at the Roxbury, where they're like, we're gonna make the inside of the club the outside, and the outside is like the inside.
So everyone's dancing outside, but you got
Yeah.
to go inside to wait online to get out.
You're like in the club, you're like, and it's really the outside because the outside is more interesting.
That's funny. So it's like I want to see this mythos.
Yeah, I mean, I sent you both of the articles, like the executive orders. They're not long, but yeah, they
Mhm.
basically try to strike a balance between. I mean, there's got to be a reason why these are coming out now, and the timing of them. Certainly, I think it's some of the impasse with Anthropic. Clearly, like the government is. I mean, executive orders are only as good as the people that are executing on them. But yeah, I mean, they're just, yeah,
Remember
they're
when
ready to do the,
Anthropic released those skills, which we know because we work with skills all day, that skills is
yeah,
just a folder of markdown files, right? It's just
yeah,
a markdown file, right? Remember when they released all those skills for the different industries and the media talked about it for months? Like, oh, legal is going to go out of business. I was like, do they know that this is just a markdown file? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, skills are awesome. I use them every day, but there's a lot of this idea of like, the those that are kind of trying to understand the AI market from the outside. They take these things and they hype them up. So it's like I don't, you know, I'll believe it when I see it. When I can
Yeah.
touch Mythos and run it on a project I've had and it finds a whole bunch of vulnerabilities that I never even considered, then I'd be like, okay, this is cool. But remember, at the end of the day, it's not like some like brilliant new model. It's essentially like what Opus that's RL'd for looking for issues, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, this was good. Next week we will. I don't know. Maybe we should talk about goals and workflows.